Imagine driving home on an ordinary evening. Traffic is light. The radio is low. Nothing feels unusual. Then flashing lights appear in the mirror. You pull over calmly. An officer approaches your window and says, "Measured and direct. This vehicle has been reported stolen." No accusation in the tone. Just procedure. Just authority. Now pause. What would you do in that moment? Would your heart race? Would your voice sharpen? Would you rush to defend yourself? Or would you breathe? In this fictional scenario, the driver happens to be someone known worldwide. Keanu Reeves. But in this moment, reputation doesn't matter. There's no film set. No cameras. No audience. Just a quiet roadside. An allegation. And a decision. People often imagine pressure as loud and chaotic. But real pressure? It's subtle. It's the space between words. The pause before a response. The weight of being misunderstood. The officer waits. Professional. Observant. And instead of reacting defensively, the driver adjusts slightly in his seat. Shoulders relaxed. Hands visible. Breathing slow. Not passive. Not submissive. Composed. Because here's something most people overlook. The first response to tension often determines how the rest unfolds. In interviews over the years, Reeves has spoken about preparation, about discipline learned while training for physically demanding films like John Wick. Not as a real-life enforcer. Not as anything beyond an actor dedicated to his craft. But as someone who understands rehearsal, breath control, and staying present. So imagine applying that same discipline here. No dramatic speeches. No sudden movements. Just clarity. Documents retrieved slowly. Eye contact maintained respectfully. Voice steady. Because what happens next isn't about proving status. It's about managing perception. And sometimes the strongest move in a tense moment is choosing not to escalate it. So the real question isn't whether the car was stolen. It isn't whether authority was mistaken. The real question is this. When confronted unexpectedly, who do you become in the first 5 seconds? That's where this story truly begins. The air between them feels still. Not hostile. Not friendly. Just procedural. The officer stands beside the vehicle, posture upright, expression neutral. A routine check delivered with professional calm. There's no raised voice. No dramatic tension like in films. Just a statement that carries weight. This vehicle matches a report. And that's where perception begins to shape reality. Because situations like this aren't really about cars. They're about uncertainty. In high-pressure environments, the human brain looks for threat first. It scans tone, posture, speed of movement. It predicts outcomes before facts are fully formed. Most people, when suddenly accused of something they didn't do, feel an immediate surge of adrenaline. Heart rate rises. Breathing shortens. Thoughts scatter. The instinct is to defend. To explain quickly. To correct forcefully. To prove innocence as fast as possible. But speed doesn't always equal strength. In this fictional scenario inspired by the public persona of Keanu Reeves, the reaction is different. Not because of fame. Not because of influence. But because of discipline. Over the years, Reeves has trained extensively for physically demanding film roles, including the precision-based choreography seen in John Wick. That preparation, by his own public statements, required repetition, focus, and control under simulated stress. Training for film isn't real-world authority, but it does teach something valuable. How to stay present when intensity rises. And that presence matters more than most people realize. Back at the roadside, the exchange continues. License and registration, please. The request is standard. And here's where many situations shift. Hands move too quickly. Voices become sharp. Body language turns defensive. But in this version of events, movement is deliberate. Measured. A slow reach toward the glove compartment. No sudden gestures. Documents retrieved without rush. Breath steady. This is not about intimidation. It's about regulation. Psychologists often describe composure as controlled breathing paired with intentional pacing. When you slow down physically, you slow down emotionally. And when emotion slows, clarity improves. The officer observes. Micro-expressions matter here. Eye contact, steady but not challenging. Tone, cooperative but not submissive. There's a subtle difference between confidence and defiance. Confidence is quiet. Defiance pushes. And in intense interactions, that distinction can change everything. It's easy for an online audience to imagine confrontation, to expect escalation, to anticipate a dramatic reveal. But real-life pressure rarely unfolds that way. It's quieter, more nuanced, more human. The situation isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about allowing information to surface. The registration matches. The identification aligns. A second verification confirms it. The initial report? A similar vehicle. Same color. Same model. Different plate. An understandable mix-up. And here's the crucial detail. Nothing dramatic needed to happen for resolution to occur. No raised voices. No humiliation. No dominance display. Just process. Just patience. Online, people might ask, why didn't he argue immediately? But that question reveals something deeper about how we interpret strength. We often associate power with reaction. With speaking first. With speaking loudest. Yet in many real-world environments, especially structured ones, the ability to remain composed under scrutiny signals far more stability than any forceful defense ever could. Because sometimes the strongest statement you can make is allowing the moment to unfold without losing yourself inside it. And that's where this story begins to shift, not toward confrontation but toward understanding. The documents are now in the officer's hands. The roadside grows quieter. There's no shouting. No dramatic soundtrack. Just the faint hum of passing traffic and the subtle awareness that something unresolved still hangs in the air. This is the part most people underestimate. The waiting. Waiting is uncomfortable because it removes control. You can't speed it up. You can't predict it precisely. You can only manage yourself within it. The officer steps slightly back toward the patrol vehicle to verify the information. Procedure. Routine. Professional. But from inside the car, perception can distort time. Seconds feel longer. Silence feels heavier. And this is where internal pressure often rises. Not because of external threat, but because of imagination. What if there's another misunderstanding? What if the system hasn't updated? What if assumption outweighs fact? In this fictional scenario inspired by the composed public image of Keanu Reeves, the response remains steady. Not detached. Not indifferent. Just grounded. Breathing stays slow. Inhale through the nose, controlled exhale. A technique often used in high-focus training environments. The same kind of breath discipline actors sometimes adopt when preparing for physically intense scenes, such as those in John Wick. Again, not real-world combat authority. Just rehearsal under pressure. And rehearsal builds familiarity with discomfort. Because pressure itself isn't the enemy. Unmanaged reaction is. Across the road, the officer glances back briefly. Observing. Assessing. Reading body language. This moment becomes less about paperwork. And more about interpretation. Is the driver agitated? Defensive? Impatient? Or composed? Body language communicates before words ever do. Hands resting visibly on the steering wheel. Posture upright but relaxed. No exaggerated movements. No visible frustration. That stillness sends a message, not of resistance but of stability. Tension at this point isn't explosive. It's psychological. Two professionals navigating uncertainty from different roles. Authority on one side. Composure on the other. Neither inherently wrong. Neither inherently dominant. Just different positions within the same interaction. Most online narratives would escalate here. They would dramatize the silence. They would build toward confrontation. But real composure isn't cinematic. It's subtle. It's choosing not to let imagination write a negative ending before facts arrive. The officer returns. Expression neutral. Another pause. I appreciate your patience. 4 simple words. Notice what changed. Not the authority structure. Not the procedure. But the tone. Patience altered perception. When someone under scrutiny remains steady, it reduces the emotional temperature of the situation. Calm has a regulatory effect. It invites calm in return. There's no grand reveal. No dramatic badge flashed. No moment of humiliation. Just clarification. The system confirms ownership. The report is officially marked as a similar vehicle alert. The tension dissolves not with spectacle, but with information. And here's the deeper shift. The strongest moment in this entire exchange wasn't when facts were confirmed. It was during the uncertainty. Because anyone can appear composed after resolution. Very few remain composed before it. That's where discipline shows. Not in dominance. Not in verbal victory. But in the ability to sit in ambiguity. Without surrendering to ego. And that's what makes the silence powerful. Not because something explosive happened. But because it didn't. The confirmation comes quietly. A small nod from the officer. A subtle change in posture. A tone that softens by just a fraction. The details match. Thank you for your cooperation. No dramatic apology. No grand reversal. Just professionalism returning to balance. And that's where the real shift happens. Not in a confrontation. Not in a display of dominance. But in the atmosphere. Moments ago, uncertainty shaped the space between them. Now clarity does. The human nervous system is sensitive to ambiguity. When we don't know how a situation will end, we brace ourselves. Muscles tighten. Thoughts speed up. We prepare for outcomes that may never arrive. But when clarity enters the picture, the body resets. Shoulders lower slightly. Breath deepens naturally. Eye contact becomes easier. In this fictional scenario inspired by the calm public image of Keanu Reeves, nothing outwardly dramatic changes, and yet everything does. Because composure maintained during uncertainty now pays off. There is no need for validation. No need to say, "I told you so." No need to assert status. That restraint matters. It's tempting when proven right to reclaim control loudly, to shift the emotional weight back onto the other person. But emotional maturity often shows itself in what someone chooses not to say. The officer hands back the documents. "Thank you for your patience. Similar vehicle report. You're clear to go." The language remains structured, professional, neutral. And that neutrality is important. Because this story isn't about embarrassment. It isn't about someone being exposed. It's about how quickly tension can dissolve when ego doesn't escalate it. There's a subtle psychological truth here. When one person refuses to heighten emotional intensity, the situation often stabilizes on its own. Escalation requires participation. Without it, friction loses energy. In films like John Wick, tension resolves through action choreography and visible movement. Audiences expect spectacle. They expect physical shifts in power. But in real-world environments, or even grounded fictional ones, the most meaningful shifts are invisible. A breath taken instead of a retort. A pause instead of a protest. A steady tone instead of a sharp one. These are small adjustments. Yet small adjustments change trajectories. Notice something else. No one won here. Authority remained intact. Professionalism remained intact. Dignity remained intact. That's rare in online storytelling, where narratives often demand a clear victor. Someone must be humbled. Someone must dominate. But maturity doesn't require that structure. The officer did a job. The driver maintained composure. The misunderstanding was corrected. That's it. And that simplicity carries weight. Because most real-world tension doesn't end in spectacle. It ends in clarification. The final exchange is brief. A nod. A calm drive safe. And as the vehicle merges back into traffic, something subtle lingers. Not adrenaline, not triumph, but awareness. Awareness of how close things could have shifted in another direction. If tone had changed. If movement had been abrupt. If defensiveness had taken control. Moments like this are fragile. They hinge on micro-decisions made in seconds. Raise your voice, trajectory changes. Roll your eyes, perception shifts. Move too quickly, tension rises. But remain steady? The situation resolves itself. That's the shift. Not from accusation to victory, but from uncertainty to understanding. And here's what makes this moment powerful. Composure doesn't erase the initial discomfort. It transforms it. Instead of becoming a story about conflict, it becomes a story about regulation. Instead of becoming a viral argument, it becomes a quiet example of control. And control, when exercised calmly, rarely looks dramatic. It looks ordinary. Almost unremarkable. Yet those are the moments that shape reputation far more than loud reactions ever could. Because strength, when filtered through maturity, doesn't need an audience. It just needs stability. And stability, especially under scrutiny, speaks for itself. If this moment were clipped into a short video and posted online, the reactions would be predictable. Who was in the wrong? Why didn't he argue back? Was the officer too quick to assume? Why didn't he assert himself more strongly? The internet rarely sits comfortably with subtlety. It prefers contrast, conflict, clear winners and clear losers. But this scenario was never built for that framework. In fact, the most interesting part of the interaction wasn't the accusation. It was the absence of escalation. And that's exactly the kind of nuance online audiences often overlook. In a culture driven by instant reactions, composure can be misread as weakness. Silence can be misread as submission. Patience can be misread as passivity. But those interpretations say more about the viewer than the moment itself. Imagine the comment sections. Some would say he should have defended himself immediately. Others would argue authority overstepped. Some would frame it as a test of dominance. But framing everything as dominance misses the deeper psychology at play. Because this was never about power. It was about regulation. In public interviews over the years, Keanu Reeves has often been described as reserved, thoughtful, even quiet in demeanor. Whether that image is amplified by media or not isn't the point. The point is this. Public perception often fills in gaps with assumptions. If someone known for intense roles, like those in John Wick, remains calm in a tense moment, people expect contrast. They expect cinematic reaction. But reality doesn't owe anyone a dramatic arc. And here's where everything subtly shifts. Online culture rewards spectacle. Algorithms amplify outrage. Clips that show raised voices travel faster than clips that show measured breathing. But longevity, especially with UK audiences who tend to appreciate reflective tone, often comes from something else. Perspective. Instead of asking, who won? Ask a different question. What does this reveal about emotional control? Emotional control is rarely flashy. It doesn't trend easily. It doesn't generate instant headlines. But it does create stability. And stability in the long term builds credibility. Now imagine two alternate versions of this same scenario. In the first version, the driver reacts sharply. Voice raised. Tone defensive. The officer responds in kind. The tension grows. The clip goes viral. Millions debate it. Everyone chooses a side. In the second version, the one you just watched unfold, the situation resolves quietly. No humiliation. No ego clash. Just clarification. Which version builds more noise? Obviously the first. Which version builds more respect? Almost always the second. Yet respect travels slower than outrage. That's why moments like this are often misinterpreted online. People expect visible victory. They overlook invisible discipline. There's also something deeper at play, identity. When someone is accused of something untrue, the instinct to protect identity activates quickly. We defend not just facts but our sense of self. But emotional maturity creates space between identity and reaction. Instead of, how dare you question me? The response becomes, let's clarify this. That gap, that tiny pause between stimulus and response, is where character lives. And the internet rarely highlights that gap. It highlights reaction. But reaction is easy. Regulation is difficult. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever been misunderstood? Misjudged? Assumed something you weren't? In that moment, what did you want most? To be heard immediately. To correct the narrative. To restore balance. Now imagine achieving that restoration not through volume but through steadiness. It feels less satisfying in the short term, but more powerful in the long term. That's the shift this story invites. Not from accusation to triumph, but from ego to awareness. Because ego wants validation. Awareness wants resolution. And when resolution comes without emotional damage, everyone walks away intact. There's another reason this kind of story resonates differently in 2026. Audiences are increasingly aware of how quickly narratives can be distorted. A 10-second clip rarely contains the full context of a moment. Yet judgments are made instantly. By slowing down the pacing, by emphasizing breath, posture, silence, this story resists distortion. It refuses to sensationalize. It invites reflection instead of reaction. And reflection holds attention longer than outrage ever could. So if someone online were to ask, why didn't he make it a bigger deal? The better response might be, why would he need to? When clarity arrives, escalation becomes unnecessary. When confidence is internal, external validation loses urgency. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Not whether authority was right or wrong. Not whether the misunderstanding was avoidable. But how easily a situation can remain stable. When one person chooses maturity over momentum. Because in a world that constantly pushes for louder reactions, choosing composure is quietly radical. Now that the moment has passed, now that the documents were returned, now that the misunderstanding was resolved, what actually remains? Not the accusation, not the flashing lights, not even the relief. What remains is the response. Because long after situations fade, patterns stay with us. How we react under pressure becomes part of who we are. And this is where the story turns inward. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't rush to defend itself. It doesn't need to prove anything in the first 5 seconds. Real strength regulates first, then responds. In this fictional scenario inspired by the composed public image of Keanu Reeves, the most powerful moment wasn't visible from the outside. It happened internally. The decision not to escalate. The decision to breathe instead of argue. The decision to let clarity arrive naturally. Those decisions are small. But small decisions repeated over time create identity. Think about environments where pressure is constant. Film sets with complex choreography, like those seen in John Wick, require rehearsal not just of movement but of focus. Timing. Patience. Resetting after mistakes. Preparation trains composure. And composure translates beyond performance. But this story isn't really about a celebrity. It's about you. When was the last time you were wrongly assumed, misunderstood, blamed for something that wasn't yours? Did your voice rise? Did your body tense? Did your mind race ahead of facts? That reaction is human, completely natural. But there's another option most people overlook. Pause. Just a few seconds. Long enough for emotion to settle. Long enough to choose your tone instead of letting tone choose you. Silence here. Imagine 3 seconds of quiet. That pause changes trajectories. Because escalation is contagious. When one person heightens emotion, the other often mirrors it. But calm can be contagious too. Measured speech lowers intensity. Open posture reduces threat perception. Steady breathing stabilizes your own nervous system first, and sometimes the other person's as well. This isn't about being passive. It's about being deliberate. There's a difference. Passive means avoiding responsibility. Deliberate means choosing timing. And timing is everything. Most conflicts don't spiral because of facts. They spiral because of reactions layered on top of incomplete information. The accusation in this story wasn't personal. It was procedural. But if interpreted personally, it could have become something else entirely. How many situations in life follow that same pattern? A short email that feels abrupt. A comment that sounds dismissive. A question that feels accusatory. We react to tone before verifying intent. We defend identity before checking context. And often, the tension that follows wasn't inevitable. It was accelerated. Now consider the alternative. You receive something unexpected. Instead of replying instantly, you wait. Instead of correcting sharply, you clarify calmly. Instead of assuming hostility, you allow space for misunderstanding. The outcome may not be dramatic, but it will almost always be cleaner. And cleaner outcomes build quieter reputations. Reputation isn't built in highlight moments. It's built in micro moments. Moments when no one applauds restraint. Moments when no one rewards patience publicly. Moments when you regulate yourself simply because it's the right standard to hold. That's discipline. Not the cinematic kind. Not the choreographed intensity seen on screen. But internal discipline. The kind that doesn't require witnesses. The kind that strengthens character without spectacle. In many ways, the roadside interaction was ordinary. And that's what makes it powerful. Ordinary situations reveal extraordinary habits. Anyone can stay calm when they feel respected. Staying calm when you feel questioned, that's different. It requires confidence rooted internally, not externally. Because external confidence needs validation. Internal confidence remains steady regardless of perception. So here's the quiet question this story leaves you with. What would change in your life if you treated pressure as a cue to slow down instead of speed up? How many conversations would shift? How many misunderstandings would dissolve faster? How much energy would you save? We often imagine growth as something dramatic. A breakthrough. A transformation. But sometimes growth is this simple. You pause. You breathe. You choose your response carefully. And you leave situations intact instead of inflamed. There is no viral celebration for that. No trending clip. No dramatic applause. But there is something better. Stability. And stability compounds. Because the strongest presence in any room is usually the one that doesn't react impulsively. It observes. It regulates. It responds. And then it moves forward without carrying unnecessary friction. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Quiet. Controlled. Sustainable. And in a world that rewards reaction, choosing composure might be the most powerful decision you make all week. By the time the road stretches open again, the moment is already fading. The lights are no longer flashing behind the car. The engine hum is steady. The city continues as if nothing happened. And that's the quiet truth about most tense situations in life. They pass. What stays is who we were inside them. This story was never really about an accusation. It wasn't about authority. It wasn't even about misunderstanding. It was about identity under pressure. Because pressure doesn't create character. It reveals it. In this fictional scenario inspired by the composed public image of Keanu Reeves, there was no dramatic showdown. No cinematic speech. No visible triumph. just restraint. And restraint rarely trends, but it transforms. When people think about strength, they often picture dominance, control of the room, the loudest voice winning the exchange. Yet real-world strength operates differently. It absorbs tension without multiplying it. It redirects friction instead of amplifying it. It chooses clarity over ego. That choice is subtle, almost invisible. But invisible decisions shape visible lives. Imagine how easily that moment could have shifted. A raised tone, a defensive gesture, a sarcastic remark. Each one would have nudged the situation toward escalation. And escalation feels powerful in the short term. It gives a rush. It asserts presence. It demands attention. But attention isn't the same as respect. And reaction isn't the same as control. Control is quieter. Control doesn't need validation. Control waits. There's a reason audiences are slowly shifting toward more reflective storytelling, especially in places like the UK, where understated composure often carries more weight than exaggerated theatrics. People are tired of outrage cycles, tired of viral humiliation clips, tired of moments engineered purely for reaction. What feels refreshing now is maturity. And maturity doesn't announce itself. It demonstrates itself. Think about the most stable people you know, the ones others turn to in tense moments. They don't rush to speak first. They don't react instantly. They observe. They process. They respond carefully. That's not weakness. That's leadership. Not leadership as a title. Leadership as presence. The presence that lowers the emotional temperature of a room. The presence that makes misunderstandings easier to resolve. The presence that refuses to let ego steer. When you look back on your own life years from now, the moments you'll respect most won't be the ones where you won an argument. They'll be the moments where you handled pressure with dignity, where you kept your tone steady, where you didn't allow someone else's assumption to dictate your behavior. Because composure builds something deeper than victory. It builds credibility, and credibility compounds. Every calm decision strengthens your internal standard. Every measured response reinforces who you are. You don't need an audience for that. You don't need applause. You just need consistency. And here's the final shift in perspective. Maybe the strongest person in a tense situation isn't the one who proves themselves right. Maybe it's the one who doesn't feel threatened by being questioned. That level of confidence doesn't come from status. It comes from self-regulation. From knowing that facts don't change based on tone. From understanding that temporary discomfort doesn't require permanent reaction. The misunderstanding in this story resolved quickly. But the lesson stretches further. The next time someone misreads your intent, the next time you feel unfairly judged, the next time you sense tension building, pause. Not because you're unsure, but because you're certain enough to slow down. Breathe before speaking. Observe before responding. Clarify before escalating. That pause is power. It creates space between emotion and action. And in that space lives choice. Choice separates impulse from discipline. Impulse reacts. Discipline responds. Impulse escalates. Discipline stabilizes. In a world that rewards speed, choosing steadiness feels almost radical. But radical calm lasts longer than reactive noise. There was no spectacle on that roadside. No viral confrontation. No humiliation. Just two roles meeting under uncertainty and separating with clarity. And maybe that's the message worth sharing. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's rare. Maybe the strongest person in the room isn't the one who wins. It's the one who doesn't need to. The one who understands that dignity doesn't require dominance. The one who knows that composure is louder than aggression. The one who walks away unchanged by tension. Because tension never controlled them to begin with. If this perspective shifts how you see strength, then the story did its job. Because the real lesson was never about a car. It was about character. And character is built in moments. When no one is clapping, no one is watching, and no one is keeping score. Just you, your breath, and the choice you make. In the first 5 seconds,